Hey, this is Jeff, and welcome to Startup Therapist, where we focus on the people part of startups. And we've got a top guest today, Amy Vernetti. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Jeff. How's it going?
Good, thank you. Amy is incredibly modest, but she is one of the top recruiters, executive recruiters in Silicon Valley. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But let me tell you a bit about Amy's perspective because it's really useful. So, Amy, you've worked at two of the top firms in the executive search field, Korn Ferry, Heidrick and Struggles. And Amy, you're now a partner at True Search,
Yes.
which is a boutique executive search firm focused. You're focused on Silicon Valley, is that right?
Yeah, well, I do searches all over the country, but I'm focused on investor-led companies.
Okay, got it. And any particular industries or sectors?
Well, as a firm, we serve the technology industry, broadly defined, very broadly defined. I do a good amount of work in enterprise software, digital media, even retail and e-commerce, and mobile.
Great. So I think it's safe to say you've got a great perspective on both what boards and venture capitalists are looking for in leaders of startups, as well as what CEOs should be looking for in their top teams. Is that safe to say? So
Yes.
That's what I thought we'd talk about today. And I think our viewers will find it really useful to kind of understand those characteristics.
Okay.
So why don't we start with maybe the first part being what VC firms are looking for in leaders today. So cutting across all the industries you mentioned, what are some of the core characteristics that you're finding to be most important in this very fast-changing economy?
Yeah, I think. Oh gosh, this is a big topic. I think that investors they're looking for people who are comfortable with measurement because we're in an environment where everything is measured. And even if you have a healthy respect for the intuitive side of business and believe strongly in your gut instinct, and that is something that's very valued by boards too. But I think you have to balance things these days, and you have to be comfortable with measurement and metrics and data and analysis at the same time that you embrace the more intuitive side of your leadership.
Are there any certain kinds of backgrounds or personalities or training or upbringing that prepare people for that kind of scrutiny and metrics-based orientation?
Well, I actually think that this might be a little surprising, but I think they are well suited for the next phase of leadership because they're used to living life under a microscope. Everything they do is.
Hey, Amy, you actually froze. Oh, now you're back with us. Okay, we're fine. You're back.
Okay.
Let's go.
Yeah. Where did it stop? What I said is that the millennial generation is used to being under a microscope. Everything they do is magnified on social media, and so there's a certain level of transparency. What you see is what you get, and you may not like what you see or what you get, but it's hard to hide it. So, I think that if you, and I think we can learn from some of the younger folks. Some of us older folks can learn from them because
Speak for yourself.
Right? Okay, just me. I was referring to me, not you, Jeff. I think we come from an environment. I am so surprised at how much sort of training and openness and apprenticeship goes on even in our firm, where when you and I were learning, it's sort of like, figure it out, kid.
Right. Now there's actually an investment in teaching and training.
Yeah, and watching and learning. And so I think that that's the biggest trend. And I think that leaders who are open to that type of thing, who embrace transparency, will do better going forward than the hide the ball types.
So I presume you do searches in situations where the founder is stepping aside, whether the founder has decided to step aside or the founder has been asked to step aside. Tell us a bit about those situations, and most importantly, what kind of CEO replacement can partner very effectively and take over that kind of situation?
Yeah. Well, it's a painful transition in the best of cases. And I'll even go so far as to say I've just so rarely seen it go really well. In fact, a lot of times when we do searches, we prefer if the founder isn't present. So with that as the backdrop, I think CEOs need to understand, we're in a point in the Valley, I think you know this, where founders and founder status is elevated and celebrated and protected. That goes in waves. There are times when that's not the case, or there have been times historically when that's not the case. I think we're in a time now where founders are, investors want to preserve the useful life of founders, which I think is a great thing. And so for CEOs coming into that environment, I think you have to be extremely sensitive, both personally and professionally, to what a founder is going through, and empathetic, and check your ego at the door. It is a founder-run company, and I think even if the founder has stepped aside in some different role, they still have a lot of passion and appreciation for the business. And I think the way that investors get sideways a little bit is that they think that founders are going to respond to the money. Well, clearly they will make more money if we bring some.
But it's not just about that. It's their baby, right?
It's really not about the money for founders, as crazy as that sounds. Yeah. It's really about their dream and their vision, and can you help them realize that vision? Not can you help them get rich?
So what are the leading indicators such that a CEO of a fast-growing business can actually say, you know what, it's time for me to step aside and lead the process in an organized fashion? I know that doesn't happen all the time, but what would be an example of a leading indicator where the CEO or the founder should say, maybe it is time?
I think when the amount of work that they're doing is in a category of functions that they don't like, that's when they should start. And that can happen really quickly.
Sure.
And I think that's the beauty of that litmus test, because very few, everybody uses Mark Zuckerberg as an example. So he's a product guy.
Right.
And so the point at which the sales, marketing, HR, finance started to become a lot of what he did on a daily basis, he turns to Sheryl Sandberg. And that's a textbook example. We all wish that we could work out that well.
And that partnership can work very effectively, right?
Very much so.
Yeah. So let's switch gears a little bit to, go ahead.
There's one other thing that can indicate that. I was on the phone with an investor yesterday, and we were talking with a very young founder about recruiting a chief operating officer. And the founder is young and was not 1,000% clear on just what this COO would do, and et cetera, and why now. And the investors said, they had just launched and had an unbelievable first quarter and raised a good amount of money. And the investor said, because you're hot right now, the person you can get right now is better than the person you can get 18 months from now when, frankly, you may stumble.
Yep.
So strike while the iron is hot. And I think that's, I think nobody wants to really talk about it that way.
Well, and it makes sense, though, because a lot of entrepreneurs are told to raise money when things are going well, and you can raise money. What you're saying is raise talent in the same kind of, think about it that way.
That's exactly right.
Got it. So let's shift gears a little bit now to, instead of the board recruiting a CEO, let's talk about the CEO recruiting her staff or his staff.
Okay.
You're a top Silicon Valley headhunter. We're looking for the inside scoop here. We're looking for the secrets. Okay. What leads to a successful search process of a CEO or founder recruiting their top team or their top table, if you will? What makes the difference between the searches that go well and the searches that don't go well?
Yeah. I think it's a combination of many things. One of the things is listening to the market. So being able to, you need to have a recruiter who's going to get enough people in front of you to have a sample size that you can react to. So, a lot of founders don't love sitting and interviewing executives.
Yep.
But you need to go through that process, develop your pattern recognition, create a large enough sample size, and understand it's not only assessing the candidate pool, but there is an addressable market of candidates.
So the candidates that say no and are not interested in engaging in the search, you mean listening to why they're not interested?
Yeah, that's part of it. But if you have a sample size in front of you, generally speaking, those are the types of candidates that are going to react positively to your opportunity. So you can, so just be aware that we are creating a market for talent for your company.
Got it.
And, recognizing that And the talent is not, or the talent market we're creating is not infinite, and it exists for a moment in time, and you need to be aware of that and decisive. But I'm not suggesting that people make decisions quickly and settle.
But what I hear you saying is you need to be prepared to know what you are looking for and the business needs, and extend an offer to the first person that meets those criteria and would fit your culture, because within a couple of weeks they may be gone.
Yeah, I think that's partly what I'm saying. But what I'm also saying is we also love clients who stick to their guns and hold out for somebody that they think is really special. Mm-hmm. So it's this weird combination of being well-informed and decisive, yet patient and maintaining high standards.
How many candidates would you say that a founder should see? All else being equal, let's say they're hiring a head of sales or head of marketing or a CFO.
Yeah.
There must be a minimum number and a maximum number.
There is. I mean, I don't think you can make a decision unless you see at least 4 people.
Okay.
I think that's an absolute minimum. But I think when you get beyond, 8, they start to be repetitive, and you start to sort of see patterns, and you may not be learning as much. So somewhere between 4 and 8. Now, some people want to see 10, 12, 15 people, and that's okay. It's just that you need to make sure that you're learning with all the additional people and not just running bodies through.
What advice would you give to a founder? Let's say a founder came up through a product or technology. They're hiring their first head of sales. Or they came up through sales and marketing. They're hiring their first CTO. So they're interviewing someone that is not from their background or skill set. What advice would you give to that founder or CEO?
Oh, they need to use a proxy. They need to engage somebody, and sometimes that's a board member. Sometimes, some of the I work with some large private equity firms as well. They've got their technology gurus inside. They're on their operations team, and I just did a chief technology officer search, and one of the firms had this guy, and we used him as our secret handshake person because I'm not an engineer. The CEO wasn't an engineer, so you've got to outsource that little chunk of the process.
Domain specialist. You need to find someone you trust to do that part of the vetting.
Yep, and that doesn't just apply to technology people. I think that VPs of sales are, because they're constantly trying to sell you. Yeah. And so sometimes get them with an executive on your board who happens to come up through sales, and they can tell you what a quality sales executive is like. Got it.
What other advice would you give to someone who's interviewing executives maybe for their first time? They've never been through a search process. They just raised $5 million. They're hiring a senior team, and they look to you. Yeah. What do you tell them?
Yeah, I'm working with somebody exactly like that right now. And I tell him he's got to develop pattern recognition. So before we even started the search, I sent 3 executives over to meet with him, just strictly as a get to know you. I start to identify what you like and don't like in these people, and start to develop a point of view, and then start to understand where you're really more fundamentally uncomfortable assessing people. And then rely on somebody who does it. I've been doing this for 20 years, so I have this pattern recognition built up.
Right. Since you've been doing it so, I don't want to say so long, but for a while, Amy, tell us about a search gone wrong. No names, no companies, but just the search from hell that made you almost want to leave the business. And tell us what you learned from it that a founder or a CEO could benefit from to prevent that from happening to them.
God. First of all, that never happens to me, so I'm going to have to use examples from my colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
So, I just had a very painful one. We were working on a CEO search. It was a founder-led company, actually co-founders, CEO and CTO, which it was very tricky. Their relationship was very tricky. We talked to, it was in a hot space, so we talked to some very, very compelling CEO candidates. And in fact, sadly, I needed to go to the board and with a list of the 8 people that we talked to who are now running other companies.
Oh my God!
That was no fun. And at the 11th hour, they were of course running out of money this whole time. And at the 11th hour, it was either we found one additional candidate, but they had burned through so much money they couldn't afford to pay this person anything. So the founder or CEO was about to close a round, and it was either, close the round so that you can compensate this CEO, or close the round, but then maybe you can remain as the CEO
right.
because you have successfully raised a round.
So they're conflicted.
Right. So, and I think that sadly those founders are going to lose their company.
Yeah.
They're going to lose their company. It's very sad. And so I think self-awareness, honesty, transparency, those were the things that were really lacking in the EQ of this founding team. And I think their board was not as engaged as they needed to be. It was painful.
You mentioned EQ, emotional quotient, which we talk a lot about at Startup Therapist. And earlier, back to our first question, you talked about this new metrics orientation and metrics-driven style. Those, in many people, don't exist in tandem, right? It's one or the other, high IQ, metrics orientation driven, high EQ. How do you find candidates that have both? Because from what you're saying, that becomes the new standard in this economy. I have to imagine those people are few and far between.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it does exist in this. I think both sides do exist in people. I think one is always going to be dominant. When I take on a new search, when I am willing and open to working with young founders, but I need to know that the lines of communication are open, because and I've just recently met with two different founders, recently funded young entrepreneurs. One I opted not to work with, and one I decided to work with. And the number one reason was their receptivity to data and information
and feedback.
What? And
feedback, right? Are they open to input and feedback? Yeah.
Exactly, and knowing what they don't know and relying upon others. Yep. I think both sides do exist. I think we all have a little bit of each, I hope, and it's just a matter of which is dominant.
Got it. Okay, last set of questions briefly are on working with an executive search firm or a headhunter. So many of our viewers will hire a search firm to help them find somebody. How long does a typical search take? What is a reasonable expectation? And again, what advice would you give to the founder if they want to compress that time? What's the single biggest thing that they can do to help accelerate the search?
Yeah. So searches are designed to take 90 days. Sometimes we can get them done in 45 days. Sometimes they take 180 days. The most consistent timing for us is right around 100 days. Okay. So a founder can do a couple of things. First of all, make themselves available for interviews. Mm-hmm. So if you're too busy for meetings, you have to understand that you are recruiting this person. They are not applicants. You need to invest time to convince them to join. So make yourself available.
And that can be evenings, weekends, but if days and weeks go by, you're at risk of losing that candidate.
Absolutely. Rely upon your board to help you in the process. So they can help assess and they can help close, and don't forget to take good advantage of your investors. If you're too busy doing other things, recruiting is time consuming.
Right.
And it's almost like, so if you're fundraising, you can't fundraise and recruit at the same time.
Can't be done.
It's impossible.
Yep.
So, sequence those events, and you could approach the mindset could be approach a recruiting process very much like you recruit a fundraising or like you approach a fundraising process. Right. You are laser focused on that.
Right.
Now, that's not always realistic for founders because they're doing a million different things at once.
This is all while they're running the business.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So like fundraising, you know how hard, and you personally know how hard it is to run a business while you're trying to raise capital. It's a similar dynamic with recruiting. So you've got to make it a priority. You've got to stick to your guns. So don't settle, which from doing what it might sound like I'm like, why am I concerned about that? Because at the end of the day, we are only as good as our most recent placement. And if your gut instinct tells you this candidate is better than that one, stick to your guns. Yep. And the right recruiter will be on the same side of the table with you and will be encouraging you to do that.
And that's the advantage of considering a retained model versus a contingency model, which a lot of people shy away from a retained search model, but the benefit is hopefully a more objective advice from the recruiter because they're getting paid regardless to be a consultant.
That's right. And also, we'll do it over for free if something goes horribly wrong. We work until it's done. There's no time constraint, so those types of things. So treat the process much like you would treat a fundraising process. Stick to your guns on quality levels, and then use your board and your recruiter for objectively assessing candidates.
Great. Amy, that was fantastic. Tell me, how can a founder or entrepreneur get in touch with you if they're interested in talking with you about helping with the search, or just even seeing if the search makes sense?
Yeah, they can email me, amy@truesearch.com. I'm on email constantly.
24/7.
24/7.
Great. And the website is truesearch.com.
Yeah, truesearch.com.
Okay.
Yep.
Amy, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us.
Okay, Jeff, it's great to talk to you.
Good luck on the search.
Okay, bye-bye.
Take care.